Right now, in educational settings across the country, there's this statistic that completely blows my mind.
Oh, the anaphylaxis one.
Yeah, exactly. Up to 20% of anaphylactic shocks happen to children who have absolutely no medical history of allergies. Like none at all.
Right. Zero prior diagnosis.
No warning signs, no meticulously detailed healthcare plan sitting in a nice binder in the school office, nothing.
And yet, the expectation is that the adults in that building, the geography teacher, the lunchtime supervisor, will know exactly what to do.
In a matter of seconds, basically,
Yeah.
to save a child's life.
It's terrifying, really.
It is, and that's what today's deep dive is all about. We're exploring the space where legislation just completely collides with that terrifying, unpredictable reality.
Yeah, because it is a staggering statistic, and I think it completely reframes how we think about medical safety in education.
Right, because we're so used to thinking of medical conditions as known quantities, aren't we?
Exactly. We expect this very neat linear process, like a child gets sick, a doctor provides a diagnosis, the parents tell the school, and a plan gets filed away.
Nice and tidy.
Right. But the reality of human biology, particularly when we're talking about growing children, is just entirely nonlinear.
Which brings us to our source material for today. The Department for Education's March 2026 drafts statutory guidance on supporting children and young people with medical conditions and allergy.
Which is a bit of a mouthful, I know.
It is a massive document,
Yeah.
but fundamentally it's an attempt to address this messy, nonlinear reality.
Yeah, it's a dense, comprehensive piece of legislative guidance, but at its core, it really is trying to solve a very human problem.
And our mission today is to decode that puzzle for you. Because, whether you are a head teacher navigating slashed budgets or a designated safeguarding lead dealing with complex family dynamics,
Or a Senko tracking hundreds of students.
or even just a classroom teacher trying to get through a chaotic Tuesday afternoon, we know your reality.
You're balancing a million spinning plates.
Exactly. You're trying to ensure every child is safe, happy, and actually capable of accessing the curriculum. So we are not going to sit here and just read statutory bullet points at you.
Please, no. Nobody wants that.
Definitely not. We want to examine the mechanisms of this guidance, like how do medical conditions, safeguarding duties, inclusion philosophies, and the brute force logistics of running a school actually intersect.
But before we dissect those mechanisms, we really must establish our professional boundaries here.
Good point. Let's get the disclaimer out of the way.
Right. So the analysis we're providing today is strictly for educational and professional development purposes.
It does not replace clinical advice from healthcare professionals, right?
Right. Absolutely not. Nor does it supersede your own organizational policies, the finalized statutory guidance, local safeguarding procedures, or, your own professional judgment on the ground.
We are examining the frameworks, but the execution totally relies on your specific context.
Yeah.
So let's start with a bit of a stress test for that context.
Sure.
I want you to picture the medical systems you currently rely on in your setting.
Oh, this is a great exercise.
Right. Think about the binders in the office,
Yeah.
the emergency protocols pinned to the staff room notice board, the data in your management information system.
Yeah, all the stuff that looks great during an audit.
Exactly. But do those systems genuinely hold up on a rainy day in November when, say, 3 key staff members are off sick?
And the supply teacher doesn't have the login to the system.
Yes. And a child collapses on the far playing field.
Hmm.
Do your policies work then, or do they just look incredibly robust while sitting passively on a shelf?
And that passive existence is precisely what this 2026 guidance is trying to eradicate.
It's a huge shift.
It really is.
Yeah.
The document demands a transition from mere compliance, it's just having the right paperwork on file, to an active anticipatory culture.
Right.
And the foundation of this shift is deeply rooted in international law, specifically Article 28 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child.
Which guarantees every child the right to an education.
Exactly. But the DFE guidance takes that legal baseline and operationalizes it into this concept called inclusion by design.
Inclusion by design. I love that phrase.
It's powerful, isn't it? The philosophy is that an educational setting shouldn't merely tolerate a child with a medical condition. It has to actively dismantle the barriers that the condition presents to their learning and well-being.
So let's ground that in a physical mechanism. I always think about civic architecture when I hear inclusion by design.
Oh, like building accessibility.
Yeah. If you designed a brand new public building today, you build ramps into the concrete foundation from day one.
Right, it's just part of the blueprint.
Exactly. You don't build a staircase, wait for someone in a wheelchair to show up, and then hastily bolt a clunky, expensive mechanical lift to the side of the stairs.
Which is how schools used to handle medical conditions, honestly.
Totally. Anticipatory planning is just building architectural ramps into your school culture. And the beautiful thing about a physical ramp is that it doesn't just help the person in the wheelchair.
No, it helps everyone.
Right. It helps the delivery driver pushing a heavy trolley. It helps the student who's sprained their ankle playing football. It helps the parent with a pushchair.
It's the cascade effect.
Exactly. When a school designs its baseline culture to accommodate complex medical needs, the secondary benefits cascade to the entire student body.
Do you have a specific school example of that?
Yeah, so for example, if you have a blanket policy that allows all students to have water bottles on their desks, you've instantly accommodated the diabetic child or the child with a renal condition.
And you've done it without singling them out.
Precisely. But simultaneously, you've improved the hydration and cognitive function of every other student in the room.
That is the exact mechanism the guidance is advocating. Specific adaptations for individual children should ideally be supplementary to a baseline environment that is already highly accommodating.
Right.
However, the guidance introduces a mandate that is causing significant friction in the sector right now.
Okay, let's get into the friction.
Educational settings must not wait for a formal diagnosis before providing support.
Wow.
Okay. If a child is presenting with a need, the school must act on the available evidence.
So I understand the philosophical purity of that, of inclusion by design.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the harsh mathematics of running a school for a second.
Let's be real about it, yeah.
A secondary school SENCO, or a pastoral lead, might be responsible for tracking a cohort of over 1,000 students.
Easily.
If we mandate that schools cannot wait for formal medical diagnoses and they must set up anticipatory support plans based purely on parental reports or observed symptoms, aren't we risking a systemic collapse?
It sounds like an administrative nightmare, I know.
Right. How does a school leader prevent their limited resources from being buried under a mountain of unverified, potentially myth-identified, invisible conditions?
Well, the logistical friction there is undeniable. But we have to look at the alternative mechanism, which is the current state of the National Health Service.
Oh, the waiting lists.
Exactly. Awaiting a formal diagnosis for conditions like autism, ADHD, or complex autoimmune disorders can take anywhere from 18 months to 3 years.
3 years of a child's life.
Right. And if an educational setting refuses to provide accommodations during that diagnostic window, the cumulative harm to that child's education and psychological well-being is just catastrophic.
So the school has to step in.
Yes. The guidance is not asking teachers to become diagnosticians. I want to be really clear about that. It is asking them to mitigate presenting symptoms.
Mitigate the symptoms, not fix the disease.
Exactly. If a child is suffering from profound cognitive fatigue, you do not need a consultant's letter confirming chronic fatigue syndrome to allow that child a quiet space to rest during lunch.
Right.
Or to modify their physical education requirements.
So you are addressing the presenting barrier, not the medical label.
Precisely. And the guidance explicitly uses Coeliac disease as an operational example here.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If it is visibly clear that a child's health and concentration are vastly improving on a gluten-free diet, the educational setting must support the provision of a gluten-free meal.
They can't just demand a doctor's note first.
No. Forcing the child to consume gluten just to prove a reaction, or waiting months for an invasive intestinal biopsy just to satisfy a school's bureaucratic requirement, it's actively harmful.
That makes a lot of sense.
The setting's job is to evaluate the potential risk of harm if support is not provided versus the relatively low administrative cost of simply providing the accommodation.
And this mechanism applies heavily to invisible conditions, right? Which are a massive blind spot in education.
Huge blind spot.
We are conditioned to react to visible trauma, a broken arm, a severe asthma attack. But what about the child dealing with long COVID?
Or juvenile idiopathic arthritis?
Yes. Or severe endometriosis. The joint pain, the post-exertional malaise, the debilitating cramps. None of this shows up on an attendance register as anything other than generic absence.
Just a tick mark on a spreadsheet.
Right. And these children often engage in heavy masking, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. They suppress their symptoms because they are desperate to fit in, or because they fear being perceived as a burden by an already stressed teacher.
And masking is a profound safeguarding risk, isn't it?
It is, because when a child internalizes their physical distress, it inevitably erupts elsewhere.
Right. It doesn't just vanish.
No, it often manifests as sudden social withdrawal, unexplained behavioral outbursts, or chronic school refusal.
Which the school then treats as a discipline issue, not a medical one.
Exactly. This is why the guidance insists on a whole school approach. The culture cannot just live in the head of the school nurse or the Senko.
Everyone has to be on board.
The attitude of a lunchtime supervisor, a teaching assistant, or the receptionist is absolutely critical.
Let's talk about the receptionist for a second.
Yeah.
Because the receptionist is basically the front line of medical triage in most schools.
They really are.
Let's dissect that interaction. Say a child with an undiagnosed bowel condition leaves class for the third time that week. They go to the front office because they are in pain and they need a specific toilet access key.
Okay, yeah.
If the receptionist sighs, rolls their eyes, and says, "Not you again, you're always trying to get out of maths,"
Ouch.
right? The psychological mechanism of shame is instantly activated. That child will stop asking for help.
Immediately.
They will suffer in silence, their anxiety will skyrocket, and their ability to process whatever the math teacher is saying just drops to zero.
And that single offhand interaction undoes thousands of pounds of pastoral investment.
Just like that.
Just like that. When a school lacks a culture of professional curiosity, a child with a continence issue will literally dehydrate themselves deliberately so they don't have to ask to use the toilet.
That is heartbreaking, but it happens.
It happens all the time. They will avoid school trips. They will isolate themselves. The medical condition becomes secondary to the psychological trauma inflicted by the institution's rigidity.
Wow.
Which is why the guidance requires school leaders to embed this awareness into standard induction training for all staff.
Including supply teachers.
Yes, supply teachers and support staff. It must feature on the school's risk register, and it has to be overseen by a named governor and a senior leader.
So if that broad anticipatory culture is the foundational architecture, how do we build the specific furniture for an individual child?
Right. How do we operationalize it?
Exactly. We have to operationalize this philosophy. And the cornerstone of doing that, according to the guidance, is the Individual Healthcare Plan, or the IHP.
The famous IHP.
Yes. And there is a massive amount of confusion in the sector about what this document actually is.
There really is. The confusion usually stems from conflating medical directives with educational logistics.
Okay, unpack that for us.
So, the guidance defines the individual healthcare plan strictly as a document which the education provider produces, owns, and maintains.
The school owns it.
Yes, it is an operational school document. It is not, under any circumstances, a clinical document.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate here to clarify this for the listener.
Go for it.
Say a child is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. The pediatric endocrinology team at the local hospital sends over a beautifully detailed 5-page diabetes care plan.
I know exactly the kind of document you mean.
Right. It outlines blood glucose ranges, insulin to carbohydrate ratios, signs of hypoglycemia. It's thorough.
Very thorough clinically.
Yes. So the Hensco prints that out, staples it to the child's file, and calls it the IHP. You are saying that is a failure of the guidance.
I'm saying that is a complete failure.
Wow. Okay. Why?
Because the document from the hospital is clinical advice. It tells you the biochemical requirements of the child. It says, this child requires their blood glucose monitored before consuming carbohydrates and requires X units of insulin. But the hospital does not know your school's bell schedule. The hospital does not know that the dining hall is a sprawling, chaotic environment, a 5-minute walk from the science block.
They don't know the layout.
They don't know the layout. They don't know the staffing structure of your PE department. The individual healthcare plan is the school's logistical translation of that clinical advice.
That makes so much sense.
Huh.
The analogy I always come back to when explaining this is the difference between a recipe and a kitchen prep plan.
Oh, I like that.
Think about it. The clinical advice from the hospital is a recipe from a Michelin star chef.
Right?
It says, this dish requires precisely diced onions caramelized for exactly 45 minutes at a low heat. That is the clinical truth.
Yes.
But an IHP is a kitchen prep plan for a busy restaurant on a Friday night.
Exactly.
It dictates who is actually standing at the cutting board chopping those onions.
Yeah.
What time the burner gets turned on so it aligns with the rest of the service.
Yeah.
Which specific workstation they're using.
And critically, what the backup plan is if the sous chef calls in sick.
Yes. If Mr. Smith is absent, who is chopping the onions?
That analogy captures the operational mechanics perfectly, because the clinical plan says administer insulin, but the IHP says Mr. Davis will supervise the administration of insulin at 11:45 a.m. in the designated medical room.
It assigns a person and a time.
Exactly. If Mr. Davis is on playground duty, Mrs. Roberts is the trained alternate.
The backup sous chef.
Right. The spare insulin is kept in the locked refrigerated box in the main office, but the child carries their immediate daily dose in their blazer pocket.
So it covers all the environmental realities.
Navigating crowded corridors, the physical distance between classrooms, access to food and drink outside of standard break times, and even how the school will manage catch-up work when the child attends unavoidable medical appointments.
Okay, so we also need to draw a hard line here between an IHP and an EHCP, an education, health, and care plan.
Yes, that is a very common point of confusion.
Because a lot of students with highly complex medical backgrounds will possess an EHCP. Does the existence of a statutory EHCP negate the need for a granular IHP?
No, absolutely not. And the guidance is highly specific about this distinction.
So you still need both?
Yes. An EHC plan is a strategic statutory document. While it will specify health provisions in Section G, it describes them at a macro level to secure funding and establish long-term educational outcomes.
Give me an example of the difference.
So an EHCP might state, the child requires constant monitoring for seizure activity to safely access learning.
Okay, this is broad.
Very broad. That is a strategic provision. It completely lacks the tactical, minute-by-minute supervisory details required on the ground.
It doesn't tell you what to do when they actually have a seizure in French class.
Precisely. You still need an IHP to define exactly what a seizure looks like for that specific child.
Because they present differently.
Yes, seizures present very differently in different neurologies. The IHP needs to outline what the specific environmental triggers are, who is authorized to administer rescue medication like buccal, where that medication is physically located, and at what precise minute an ambulance must be called.
So the EHCP gets the funding, but the IHP keeps the child alive on a Tuesday.
That is a very stark way to put it, but yes. Now, the DFE has hinted that, down the line, send reforms might merge these documents into digital individual support plans to reduce the bureaucratic nightmare for Senkos.
Which would be amazing.
It would be. But until that digital integration actually materializes, the IHP remains the tactical playbook.
And that playbook faces its ultimate stress test during transition periods, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Transitions are high risk.
Let's dissect the friction of moving a child from a primary school to a secondary school. Can a parent just hand the primary school IHP to the new head of year 7 and say, here's what works?
Absolutely not.
No.
The guidance mandates that a new setting must draw up a new individual healthcare plan. The previous plan is informative, of course, but functionally obsolete the moment the child changes environments.
Because the architectural and cultural shift between primary and secondary are just extreme.
They are completely different worlds.
Right. Think about it. In a primary setting, you have a child sitting in one static classroom with one main teacher and perhaps a dedicated teaching assistant.
Very contained.
The physical footprint of the school is small. The adults are hyper-aware of the child's baseline behavior. They can see if the child looks pale.
And the medication might be stored 20 feet away in a secure classroom cupboard.
Exactly. But in secondary school, you are dropping that child into a sprawling multi-building campus.
They are moving between 6 different classrooms a day.
Yeah, encountering up to a dozen different teachers who might only see them for 50 minutes a week. They don't know the child's baseline.
And the autonomy shift is just as significant as the geographical shift. The secondary school environment relies heavily on student self-management.
Right.
The distance to the central medical room might be a 10-minute walk through crowded, chaotic corridors. If a child's blood sugar drops or they feel an asthma attack coming on, that geographical distance is a critical risk factor.
A 10-minute walk is an eternity in a medical emergency.
It is. So the new setting has to fundamentally reevaluate the clinical advice against a completely new set of environmental risks.
Which brings us to the inevitable collision.
The collision.
Yeah, between a child's medical needs and a school's non-negotiable rules. When the tactical playbook of the IHP hits the brick wall of whole school policy, what breaks?
Well, ideally, neither breaks. They adapt. But legally, this is where the Equality Act 2010 exerts its power.
Okay, let's bring in the Equality Act.
The guidance explicitly reminds education providers that a significant medical condition often meets the legal threshold of a disability under the Act.
Right.
Consequently, schools have a proactive, anticipatory duty to make reasonable adjustments to ensure the child does not suffer a substantial disadvantage compared to their peers.
Let's look at how substantial disadvantage plays out in uniform policies.
Uniform policies are a classic battleground.
They really are.
Yep.
So a school leadership team spends months designing a strict aspirational uniform policy. Polyester blazers, specific synthetic ties, rigid rules about footwear.
Very smart, very uniform.
Right. But a child has severe atopic eczema. The synthetic fabric traps heat and sweat, triggering a massive inflammatory response.
It's physically painful.
Exactly. But the school insists the child wears the blazer to maintain standards and puts the child in isolation for non-compliance.
That scenario is a textbook example of disability discrimination.
Is it really?
Yes. Refusing to accommodate a cotton alternative or a modified uniform for a documented dermatological condition is not enforcing high standards. It is inflicting less favorable treatment due to a protected characteristic.
Wow.
A reasonable adjustment might simply be allowing the child to wear a 100% cotton jumper in the school colors, or bypassing the blazer requirement entirely.
It's such a simple fix, but schools get so stuck on the rules.
They do.
Now, a much more volatile policy friction point right now is mobile phones.
Oh yes, mobile phones are huge.
Because the national push is towards entirely phone-free school environments. But the DFE guidance specifically carves out technological exemptions.
It has to. The landscape of medical technology has evolved so rapidly. A child with type 1 diabetes is highly likely to be using a continuous glucose monitor, a CGM.
Right, which links to their phone.
Exactly. This is a sensor physically attached to their arm that transmits real-time blood sugar data via Bluetooth. The receiver for that data is almost always the child's smartphone.
So if you take the phone away?
If the school policy mandates that all phones must be locked in lockers at 8:30 a.m., you are effectively blinding the child to their own internal biochemistry.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Highly dangerous. They need the phone on their desk within Bluetooth range at all times.
But the logistical friction there is fascinating. I really want to dissect the optics of this in a classroom with 30 teenagers.
It's tricky to manage, definitely.
Because teenagers have a hyper-tuned, almost militant radar for what they perceive as unfair.
They really do. Why does he get his phone?
Exactly. If one student is allowed to have their iPhone out on the desk checking their glucose, or another is allowed to eat a flapjack in the middle of a chemistry lesson because they need pancreatic enzymes.
Or another can just stand up and walk out to the toilet without asking permission.
Right. How does a teacher manage the optics of that without breaching the child's medical confidentiality or losing control of the room's behavior policy?
This is where the tactical meets the cultural. You do not manage this in the moment of crisis. You manage it proactively.
How so?
Redefining the concept of fairness for the entire student body is a leadership responsibility. Fairness does not mean uniformity. Fairness means every individual receives the specific tools they need to access their education.
It's the difference between equality and equity.
Exactly. A skilled teacher manages the room by establishing clear, normalized boundaries early in the year.
They set the tone.
Yes. They don't need to announce, Sarah has a bowel condition and James is diabetic. They simply set the cultural norm. In this classroom, some students have authorized medical accommodations that require them to use specific devices, consume snacks, or step out.
This is monitored by me, and it is part of how our school functions.
Perfect. And when the adults treat it as utterly mundane, the teenagers quickly lose interest and just accept it as part of the background environment.
That makes total sense. Normalize it, and the novelty wears off.
Exactly.
Let's pivot to a policy area that is arguably causing more distress than uniforms or phones. Attendance management.
The attendance algorithm.
The intersection of chronic medical conditions and algorithmic attendance tracking is creating a lot of trauma right now.
The guidance is exceptionally firm on attendance. It explicitly warns schools against utilizing standard automated absence management processes when they are aware a child has a chronic health condition.
I call it cruelty by algorithm.
That's a good way to describe it.
It really is. Think about it. A family is in and out of the pediatric ward. They are dealing with a child going through chemotherapy or managing a severe flare-up of Crohn's disease.
The family is already under immense stress.
The parents are exhausted, terrified, doing everything they can. And then, because the child's attendance dips below 90%, the school's management information system automatically spits out a threatening, legally worded letter warning the parents of fines and prosecution.
Which just destroys the relationship between the family and the school.
Completely destroys it.
And it is not just cruel, it is maladaptive. The guidance states that health-related absence must be managed within a supportive, inclusive framework, not a punitive one.
So how should schools handle it?
Schools are directed to authorize absences for medical appointments and to clearly distinguish in their data between an absence arising from a genuine medical incapacity and an absence linked to behavioral truancy.
They need to separate the two.
Yes. Furthermore, setting artificially lower attendance targets for a sick child or defaulting to a sustained part-time timetable without rigorous ongoing review is highlighted as unacceptable practice.
Because it just pushes them out.
It quietly pushes the child out of the system entirely.
And we have to talk about the physiological stress of reintegration, too.
Yes, when they finally come back.
Right. When that child finally returns after a 3-week absence due to a severe asthma exacerbation, the school's instinct is often academic panic.
You've missed so much work.
Exactly. They hand the kid a massive stack of missed worksheets and say, you need to catch up on all this science coursework by Friday.
Which is overwhelming.
It is. For a child whose immune system is already compromised, the massive spike in cortisol and anxiety from that academic pressure is enough to trigger a secondary medical flare-up.
Which is why reintegration plans must prioritize emotional readiness alongside academic progression.
Emotional readiness first.
Yes. The guidance suggests facilitating planned, low-pressure opportunities for the child to visit the setting before a full return.
Like a phased return.
Sort of. It might mean coming in just for a shared lunchtime, attending a favorite art lesson, or having a brief well-being check-in with a trusted staff member.
Just to get them used to the building again.
Exactly. Rebuilding peer connections and institutional confidence is the prerequisite for catching up on the science coursework.
You can't learn if you're terrified.
Precisely.
Now, this philosophy of building confidence and autonomy naturally leads us to the physical logistics of medical care in the building.
The actual management of the medicines.
Right, because giving a teenager the autonomy to reintegrate and manage their own learning also means giving them the autonomy to manage their own medication. And this forces a massive paradigm shift in how schools handle drugs.
The guidance is unequivocal on the logistics of emergency medication. Children must have quick, unhindered access to their medication at all times.
We need to put a spotlight on this, because schools get this wrong constantly, out of a misplaced, deeply ingrained sense of security.
The lock-and-key mentality.
Exactly. The instinct of every school professional is to lock dangerous things away. We lock up the Stanley knives in art. We lock up the Bunsen burners in science. We lock up the cleaning chemicals.
Naturally.
So naturally, when someone hands the school office a box of adrenaline auto-injectors, EpiPens, Jex pens, the instinct is to put them in a metal cabinet, lock the cabinet, and hide the key.
But the guidance says this is a critical failure. Emergency medications, AAIs, and asthma reliever inhalers must never be locked away.
Never.
Never. The risk mathematics are totally clear here. If a child goes into a severe anaphylactic shock, their airway is swelling shut. Their blood pressure is plummeting.
It happens so fast.
You have minutes, sometimes seconds, to administer adrenaline. If the medication is locked in a cabinet and the only person with the key is the school business manager who has stepped off site for a lunch meeting,
that delay can be fatal.
It is. Delays in administering adrenaline are repeatedly cited in coroner's reports as a primary factor in anaphylaxis fatalities.
But I hear the pushback from head teachers already on this. Duty of care versus safeguarding.
Right, the conflict.
A head teacher will say to me, if I leave a box of spring-loaded adrenaline needles unlocked on a shelf in the staff room, what happens if a curious Year 7 student wanders in, grabs it, and accidentally injects themselves in the thumb? Am I not failing my safeguarding duty to that Year 7 student?
It's a valid concern conceptually.
So how do we resolve that tension?
By understanding proportional risk mitigation. Life-saving accessibility in a known medical emergency always trumps the hypothetical general risk of tampering.
So the known risk beats the hypothetical risk.
Exactly. You mitigate the tampering risk through supervision, education, and strategic placement. You don't leave them on a low table in a public corridor.
Right. Be smart about it.
You store them centrally in an unlocked, clearly labeled box in a staff-supervised area. But the guidance also notes that Particularly in secondary schools, the primary mitigation is that the students themselves should be carrying their own devices.
Right, they should have it on them.
Once a child is competent, the medication should be in their pocket or their bag, moving with them.
Okay, what about the non-emergency end of the spectrum, like over-the-counter pain relief? The guidance has introduced a massive course correction regarding paracetamol and antihistamines.
It has, and it is a fascinating intervention by the DFE into public health logistics, honestly.
I love this part.
The guidance states explicitly that schools should not demand a GP prescription for over-the-counter medications.
Not demanded at all.
No. It labels the practice of forcing parents to get a doctor's note for simple pain relief as a misuse of NHS resources.
That is a total game changer. For years, schools have had rigid, liability-focused policies saying, we cannot administer Calpol or ibuprofen unless a doctor has prescribed it with a printed pharmacy label.
Yes, covering their backs.
So a parent whose child just has a mild headache or period cramps is forced to join an 8.0 a.m. telephone queue, begging an overworked GP receptionist for an emergency appointment.
Just for a note.
Simply to get a piece of paper authorizing a medication they could buy in a supermarket for 50 pence. It's an absurd bureaucratic loop.
And it clogs the healthcare system for those who genuinely need it.
Exactly.
The new framework clarifies that non-prescription medicines can be safely administered by school staff or self-administered by a competent child, relying purely on written permission from the parents.
Just parent permission is enough.
Yes. It even clarifies that prescribed controlled drugs can be administered by trained staff without needing to trigger the complex misuse of drugs safe custody regulations, provided they are held for personal administration.
Okay, let's discuss the legislation around spare medication, because this ties directly back to the 20% of unknown anaphylaxis cases we discussed at the start of the deep dive.
Right, the 2017 regulations.
Yes. The Human Medicines Amendment Regulations 2017 allowed schools in England to purchase spare adrenaline autoinjectors without a prescription.
A huge change.
But the 2026 DFE guidance takes this further, doesn't it?
It does. It's a firm expectation that all schools will stock these spare devices for emergency use.
What are the logistics of that expectation? Like, how many pens does a school actually need?
It depends on the size and size of the setting, but generally schools are advised to obtain 4 spare AAIs.
4.
2 of the lower dose, typically 150 micrograms for younger children, and 2 of the higher 300 microgram dose for older students.
And where do they go?
In a sprawling secondary school, the guidance suggests having 2 pairs of spare devices located at opposite ends of the campus, ensuring that a rescue device is never more than a 5-minute sprint away from any given classroom or sports field.
5 minutes is the rule of thumb, then.
Basically, yes.
And with all these medical devices on site, there is an environmental health mechanism that schools often miss entirely: waste disposal.
Oh, the sharps.
Yes. Adrenaline autoinjectors contain needles. Blood glucose monitors use lancets. Schools cannot just throw these in the general staff room bin.
No, absolutely not. The guidance points out that schools must dispose of them safely using sharps bins.
Right.
To comply with environmental regulations for disposing of medicines and sharps, the school should register as a lower-tier waste carrier.
A waste carrier? That sounds intense.
It sounds it, but it is a completely free, quick online registration. It is exactly the kind of invisible administrative detail that slips through the cracks until an environmental health audit occurs.
Okay, so all of this careful logistical planning, the unlocked meds, the waste carriers, the IHPs, this all assumes the child is in the school building.
Which they aren't always.
Right. What happens when learning leaves the campus? Educational visits, residential trips, sports fixtures?
The default stance established by the guidance is inclusion.
Inclusion by default.
Yes. The school's medical conditions policy must set a clear expectation that arrangements will be made to include children with medical conditions in all off-site activities.
You implement the necessary reasonable adjustments. Unless what?
Unless explicit written evidence from a clinician states that participation is physically impossible.
Let's construct a high-friction scenario here.
Okay, let's do it.
A Year 9 student with type 1 diabetes and Coeliac disease applies to go on the school's week-long residential ski trip to France.
Oh, that's a tough one.
The logistics are terrifying for a teacher. You are dealing with foreign healthcare systems, language barriers, extreme physical exertion altering blood glucose levels, and navigating cross-contamination in foreign hostile kitchens.
A lot of variables.
A ton of variables. The overwhelming instinct of the school leadership will be to say, it's too risky, The staffing ratio is too tight. We can't guarantee the food safety. We have to decline their spot.
That instinct, while understandable from a liability perspective, is discriminatory.
It is.
The reaction cannot be, we can't. It must be, how do we?
How do we make this work?
Exactly. It requires rigorous anticipatory work. It requires a highly detailed trip-specific risk assessment. It requires rewriting the IHP specifically for the variables of a coach journey, border control, and freezing temperatures.
Because the baseline IHP is going to cover a ski slope in France.
Not at all. It involves multiple meetings with the parents to map out carbohydrate counting for unfamiliar foods. It means ensuring multiple staff members are trained to manage the condition 247, not just during school hours.
It's a massive administrative burden.
Yes, it is a massive administrative burden, but denying a child the opportunity to participate in a core memory-making educational experience simply because the paperwork is heavy is unacceptable practice.
Absolutely unacceptable.
It is.
Let's pause for another listener reflection here. Visualize your emergency medication storage right now. If you walked out of your office or your classroom and a child collapsed in the corridor, could you physically lay your hands on an asthma inhaler or a spare AAI in under 60 seconds?
Really think about that route.
Right. Think about the physical route you'd have to run. And when a child with a complex medical profile applies for your upcoming residential trip, is the immediate reaction in the staff room a groan of logistical dread or a collaborative attempt to start problem solving?
That mindset shift is everything. And this naturally transitions us to the most critical, high-stakes element of our discussion.
The emergencies.
Emergency planning, safeguarding, and the aftermath. Because we can plan the French ski trip meticulously, we can rewrite the IHP 10 times, and we can leave the cabinets unlocked, but biology remains chaotic.
Emergencies will happen.
They just will.
A child will eat a biscuit that a friend gave them, not realizing it contains cashew traces. A student will have an unexpected seizure.
It's inevitable in a population that large.
How a school responds in that precise moment of terror and in the quiet, traumatic days that follow defines its competence and its humanity.
Let's return to that anchoring statistic from the very beginning. Up to 20% of anaphylaxis reactions in schools happen to children with no pre-existing diagnosis.
No diagnosis at all.
They don't have an IHP. They don't have an allergy action plan. They don't have their own prescribed adrenaline.
Which makes those 2017 regulations regarding spare AIIs profoundly important. They aren't just for the kid who forgot their pen at home.
No, they are for the kid who is discovering they have a lethal peanut allergy in the middle of a food tech lesson.
That is a terrifying thought, but it's real.
Precisely. Under exceptional circumstances, if a child presents for the first time with an unrecognized allergy and goes into anaphylaxis, a spare AAI can be used for the purpose of saving a life, even without prior parental consent.
Wow, even without consent.
Yes. The preservation of life supersedes all other administrative requirements.
This connects medical care directly to the core function of a school, safeguarding. We often think of safeguarding purely in terms of abuse, neglect, or online safety.
But the statutory guidance on working together to safeguard children is explicitly clear on this intersection.
How so?
Safeguarding includes preventing the impairment of children's mental and physical health or development. If a school's systems fail to manage a medical condition, and that failure leads to physical harm or severe psychological distress, that is a fundamental safeguarding failure.
It's treated the same way.
It is investigated with the same rigor as any other safeguarding breach.
I want to focus on the human element of that crisis response, because this is where the policies on paper hit the reality of human panic.
Oh, the panic is real.
Teachers are trained to teach history or maths or PE. They're not paramedics. The guidance says staff are expected to use their best endeavors in an emergency, acting as a prudent parent would.
Right.
But the fear of doing it wrong is paralyzing. Imagine a teacher watching a child struggle to breathe. They know there is an adrenaline pen available, but the teacher is terrified.
They are thinking, what if it's just a panic attack?
Exactly. What if it's a severe asthma attack, not anaphylaxis? If I inject this child with a massive dose of adrenaline and I am wrong, will I stop their heart? Will I be fired? Will I go to prison?
That fear is deeply human and completely understandable. But we have to look at the medical mechanism.
Tell me about the medical mechanism.
The clinical consensus across allergy specialists is definitive. Administering adrenaline in a suspected case of anaphylaxis is exponentially safer than waiting.
It's safer to just do it.
Yes. Adrenaline is a naturally occurring hormone. If you administer it to a child who is actually just having a panic attack, they will experience an elevated heart rate, they will feel shaky, and they will need monitoring, but they will be fine.
They won't die from the adrenaline.
No. But if you withhold adrenaline from a child who is experiencing anaphylaxis because you're waiting for an ambulance to confirm it, they could die.
The hesitation is the danger.
The mechanism of action dictates that hesitation is the greater risk.
Which brings us to a crucial leadership challenge.
Yeah.
How do school leaders build a culture where a teacher feels safe enough to take that action?
It's a huge culture shift.
How do you foster what the guidance calls a no-blame learning culture when an incident or a near miss occurs instead of a culture of panic, cover-ups, and finger-pointing?
To understand the mechanism of a no-blame culture, schools need to borrow from the aviation industry's black box thinking.
Or what is known as a just culture framework, right?
Exactly. In aviation, if a pilot makes an error that nearly causes a crash, the investigation does not start by trying to fire the pilot.
Because they want to know why it happened.
The investigation assumes the pilot was trying to do a good job and asks, what systemic failures allowed a competent professional to make this error? Was the dashboard confusing? Was the communication protocol flawed? Was fatigue a factor?
So translate that to a school environment. Let's do a scenario.
Okay. A teaching assistant accidentally gives a child a dairy product during a cooking lesson, realizing it just before the child takes a bite. It's a near miss.
In a punitive culture, that teaching assistant is terrified of losing their job.
Terrified. They hide the near miss, they throw the food away and tell no one.
The system remains broken.
The system remains broken, and the next week, a different teaching assistant makes the same mistake. But this time, the child eats it. A covered-up near miss is a future fatality waiting to happen.
But in a just culture framework,
the teaching assistant immediately reports the near miss. The leadership team investigates it as the ultimate stress test for the IHP.
Right.
The guidance clearly states that carelessness, inadvertence, or a simple mistake do not amount to serious and willful misconduct.
The investigation looks at the system, not the person.
Exactly. Why did the TA make the mistake? Was the dairy alternative stored in identical packaging right next to the regular milk?
Was the TA pulled to cover the class with zero briefing on the IHPs?
Was the lighting in the prep room poor? You fix the storage, you fix the briefing protocol, you update the IHP. The system absorbs the error and becomes stronger.
That's brilliant. The incident triggers an automatic mandatory review of the individual healthcare plan.
Yes. And crucially, we must address the timeline of an emergency. An incident does not end when the ambulance drives out of the school gates.
Oh no, the aftermath.
The guidance explicitly demands that schools plan for the aftermath.
Because the psychological aftermath of a severe medical event is like a shockwave through the school ecosystem.
It is profound. The child who experienced the emergency will likely harbor immense trauma and anxiety about returning to the physical space where they thought they were going to die.
Of course. And their peers who witnessed the event.
The ones who watched their friend collapse or turn blue, they might be experiencing acute stress responses.
And the staff member who had to administer the emergency care.
Let's talk about that staff member. We expect a geography teacher to plunge a needle into a child's thigh, manage the screaming class, liaise with 999, hand the child over to paramedics, and then what?
Go teach year 8 about tectonic plates after break time.
Exactly. The physiological mechanism of an adrenaline crash in an adult who has just navigated a life or death crisis is severe.
They will be shaking.
They will be shaking, their cognitive processing will be impaired, and they may experience significant psychological distress.
So what should the school do?
The setting must provide immediate operational cover and psychological support. The school cannot function as if nothing happened.
The most effective settings are highly self-reflective ecosystems, aren't they?
Yes. They provide time for the staff involved to debrief and recover. They arrange counseling for the witnessing students.
They communicate the incident internally in a constructive, calm manner, reminding the community of the importance of the policies while fiercely protecting the dignity and privacy of the child involved.
That's the hallmark of good leadership.
Let's pull all these threads together. We've been on a deep, complex journey through the architecture of school medical policies today.
We covered a lot of ground. We began by examining the foundational culture, moving beyond a binder of compliant paperwork to a lived environment of inclusion by design.
Where anticipatory adjustments serve as ramps that benefit the entire school community.
Exactly. And where we refuse to let NHS diagnostic waiting lists dictate a child's access to support.
We demystified the IHP, separating the Michelin star clinical recipe from the messy, chaotic kitchen prep plan required to keep a child safe as they navigate the transition from a static primary classroom to a sprawling secondary campus.
We confronted the friction between medical reality and school policy, utilizing the Equality Act 2010 to redefine fairness.
We established that rigid adherence to uniform rules, mobile phone bans, and algorithmic attendance warnings must yield to reasonable adjustments that protect a child from substantial disadvantage.
We unpacked the logistics of care, the absolute mandate to never lock away emergency medications,
The removal of the bureaucratic absurdity of demanding GP notes for a dose of Calpol.
and the moral and legal imperative to design educational visits around inclusion rather than using risk as an excuse for exclusion.
And finally, we address the high stakes of emergency response, recognizing that managing medical needs is a foundational safeguarding duty.
And that borrowing black box thinking to create a no-blame culture is the only reliable mechanism for preventing near misses from turning into tragedies.
Before we close, I want to introduce a dynamic that the guidance hints at, but which is going to fundamentally rewrite this entire landscape over the next decade.
The environmental factor.
Yes, we are building these IHPs and policies based on a historical baseline of normal medical needs. But that baseline is shifting violently due to environmental factors.
Climate change is having a massive impact on child health.
Think about the impact of a changing climate on a school building built in the 1960s. We are seeing extended, highly potent pollen seasons stretching deep into the autumn, colliding with rising urban air pollution.
We're seeing extreme heat waves pushing classroom temperatures into the high 30s.
The physiological implications of that are severe. The baseline frequency of severe asthma exacerbations, allergic rhinitis, and heat-triggered eczema flare-ups is going to spike.
A school's medical policy that works perfectly well at 20 degrees Celsius will completely buckle under the pressure of a 38-degree heat wave.
When you suddenly have 30 students experiencing respiratory distress simultaneously,
And insulin stored in backpacks begins to denature because it exceeds its safe temperature threshold.
it means the inclusion by design ramps we talked about building earlier cannot just be built for today's weather. School leaders have to start anticipating an environment where chronic, environmentally triggered medical conditions become the statistical norm rather than the exception.
It's a daunting prospect.
It is. I want you to slow down for a second. Step away from the emails, the spreadsheets, and the noise of the school day. Think about your building, your staff, your physical environment, and the culture you have built.
Truly reflect on it.
If a child with a highly complex, life-threatening, and invisible medical condition walked through your school gates tomorrow morning as a new admission, would your current systems be sufficient to support them safely, confidently, and with absolute dignity?
We encourage you to review your medical condition policies not as administrative chores, but with deep professional curiosity. Because the protection of a child's dignity and their right to learn without fear must remain the central, unshakable pillar of all educational practice.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the realities of medical support in schools. Keep asking the hard questions, stay curious, and we will see you next time.